Today is December 3rd, and while most headlines move fast and loud, something far quieter unfolded behind closed doors in Nigeria, something that could change the course of one of the most controversial political cases in the country's recent history. There were no cameras, no televised address, no dramatic press conference. Yet within the walls of power in Abuja, conversations were held that may determine the future of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, the detained leader of the indigenous people of Biafra. What happened did not involve soldiers or judges in robes. It involved timing, restraint, and a careful use of executive authority. Over the past few days, many people have asked the same question. Why would President Bola Ahmed Tinubu reach out through the Attorney General of the Federation at this exact moment? And even more importantly, why now, when an appeal is already before the Court of Appeal? To understand this moment, we must slow down. This is not a story that can be grasped through headlines or social media posts. It requires context, patience, and a clear understanding of how political power and legal limits interact in a constitutional democracy. On November 30th, the governor of Abia State, Otti, quietly traveled to Sokoto State Prison. There, he met privately with Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. Days later, instead of returning home, the governor remained in Abuja. Then, on December 2nd, he was received at the presidential villa by President Tinubu. What followed that meeting is now at the center of intense speculation, a reported directive involving the Attorney General not to interfere with the courts, but to pause to create space and to explore what insiders are calling a political settlement. This is where confusion begins for many people. Did the president order the court to stop? Did the executive overstep its authority? Or is something far more calculated happening beneath the surface? In this video, we will walk through the facts carefully, step by step. No rumors, no exaggeration, just context, law, and political reality explained plainly. If you value clarity over noise, please stay with us. If you believe understanding matters more than outrage, share this video. And if you want to follow this story as it truly unfolds, not as social media distorts it, subscribe and stay with us. To understand what is unfolding now, we must return to where this chain of events truly began, not in a courtroom, not on social media, but inside a high-security prison in northern Nigeria. On November 30th, the sitting governor of Abia State, Otti, made a quiet but highly unusual journey to Sokoto State Prison. This was not a routine courtesy visit. It was not announced ahead of time, and there were no cameras present. Inside that prison, Governor Otti met face-to-face with Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, the detained leader of the indigenous people of Biafra. According to multiple reports cited by Nigerian media, including articles circulating on Telegram and later echoed by national outlets, that meeting was not symbolic. It was strategic. Governor Otti did not go to Sokoto to offer sympathy. He went to discuss a pathway forward, a possible route toward resolution, release, and de-escalation. In simple terms, the governor presented what he described as a strategy for Kanu's freedom, one that would not rely solely on prolonged courtroom battles. After that meeting, something else happened that raised eyebrows among political observers. Instead of returning to Abia State to resume his regular duties, Governor Otti traveled directly to Abuja. From November 30th through December 2nd, he remained in the federal capital. This detail matters. Every Nigerian governor maintains a liaison office and official residence in Abuja precisely for moments like this, moments when sensitive discussions require discretion, proximity, and timing. Governor Otti was waiting. By Tuesday, December 2nd, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu was available, and that same day inside the Aso Rock presidential villa, the two men met privately. While the presidency did not issue an official statement at the time of filing, respected outlets such as Vanguard confirmed the meeting and noted that it was not unconnected to ongoing efforts to secure the release of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. That phrase, not unconnected, is deliberate. In political reporting, it signals confirmation without disclosure of sensitive details. What it tells us clearly is this: Kanu's case was discussed at the highest level of government. There has been confusion online about visual evidence of this meeting. Some social media users circulated photographs claiming they showed Tinubu and Otti meeting on December 2nd. However, closer examination reveals that those images were taken weeks earlier in early November during a separate series of meetings involving other national figures. In fact, the December 2nd meeting was not photographed at all, a strong indication of its sensitivity. Now, consider the sequence. First, a governor meets a detained separatist leader in prison. Second, that same governor stays in Abuja instead of returning home. Third, he meets privately with the president. Fourth, within hours of that meeting, reports begin to surface that the Attorney General of the Federation has been contacted regarding Kanu's appeal. This was not coincidence. It was coordination. What is especially important for viewers to understand is the duration of that presidential meeting. Multiple sources suggest it was not a brief courtesy call. It was not 10 minutes. It was not half an hour. Reports indicate the discussion lasted well over an hour, pointing to a detailed, deliberate conversation rather than a symbolic exchange. At this stage, no court order had been issued. No legal document had been filed publicly. But the groundwork had been laid. The conversation had shifted away from legal confrontation alone and toward a political solution. This is the moment where the story turns, because once the president and a sitting governor begin discussing a detainee's fate outside the courtroom, within constitutional boundaries, it signals a possible change in direction. Not a release yet, not a pardon yet, but a recalibration. And it is from this recalibration that the next move emerged: the reported involvement of the Attorney General of the Federation and the controversial idea of placing the appeal process on hold, not to undermine justice, but to make room for something else. That is where we go next. The true climax of this story does not lie in a public announcement or a court ruling. It lies in what happened quietly after the meeting at Aso Rock and in how that moment triggered confusion, speculation, and a wave of reaction across Nigeria's political and media landscape. Following the private discussion between President Bola Ahmed Tinubu and Governor Alex Otti on December 2nd, information began to circulate from sources close to the presidency that a critical step had been taken. According to these sources, the president reached out to the Attorney General of the Federation, commonly known as the AGF, with a very specific objective. That objective was not to overturn a court decision. It was not to issue an order to judges. And it was not to terminate the appeal outright. Instead, the instruction was far more restrained and far more strategic. The president, through the AGF, reportedly sought to ensure that the appeal process concerning Mazi Nnamdi Kanu would not be rushed forward before a political solution could be explored. In other words, the aim was to create time. Time for dialogue, time for negotiation, time for what insiders consistently described as a political settlement. At this point, it is crucial to pause and address a widespread misunderstanding. Under Nigeria's constitutional framework, the president does not have the power to order the Court of Appeal to halt proceedings. That authority simply does not exist. Likewise, the Attorney General cannot withdraw an appeal that was filed by a defendant. Only Kanu's own legal team has the power to discontinue or amend that appeal. So what then is the AGF's role? Under Section 174 of the 1999 Constitution, the Attorney General has the authority to take over, manage, or discontinue criminal proceedings initiated by the state, particularly in matters involving federal interests. This includes the use of nolle prosequi, a legal mechanism that allows the state to formally discontinue prosecution where it deems it necessary in the interest of justice or public policy. What sources suggest is that the AGF was asked to take control of the state's position in the case, not to suppress the judiciary, but to avoid procedural escalation while political channels were opened. From the presidency's perspective, this distinction matters deeply. Allowing the appeal to proceed aggressively could lock all parties into a purely legal confrontation, one that might take years and harden positions on all sides. Worse still, it could create the public impression that the executive branch was interfering after the courts had already acted, a narrative the Tinubu administration appears keen to avoid. By contrast, pausing procedural momentum before the appeal fully engages allows room for negotiation without publicly undermining judicial independence. This is where reactions began to diverge sharply. Supporters of a political settlement viewed the move as pragmatic, a recognition that the Kanu case has never been purely legal, but deeply political, social, and emotional, particularly in Nigeria's southeast. Critics, however, immediately framed the development as executive manipulation. On social media, claims spread rapidly that the president had ordered the court to stop, even though no such order exists, and no court document supports that claim. The confusion was amplified by a flood of misinformation. Images allegedly showing Kanu in degrading conditions inside Sokoto prison began circulating widely, images portraying him as broken, humiliated, or coerced. According to the video's analysis, none of these images are authentic. No photographs or videos have been released from inside Sokoto prison since Kanu's transfer there. The images circulating online are described as AI-generated fabrications designed to provoke anger, despair, and ridicule. Public figures and anonymous accounts alike joined in the mockery, further inflaming emotions at a moment when restraint was critical. And this reaction, the video argues, is not accidental. When political settlements are underway, emotional disruption becomes a tool. Confusion weakens trust, mockery hardens resistance, and misinformation can derail negotiations before they mature. That is why this moment represents the climax of the story so far. Not because a decision has been made, but because the direction has changed, and that change has triggered fear, hope, and backlash all at once. What happens next will depend not only on legal mechanisms, but on disciplined messaging and the ability of all parties to resist the noise, while something fragile takes shape behind the scenes. As the possibility of a political settlement entered the conversation, its effects were felt far beyond the walls of the presidential villa. Almost immediately, the discussion surrounding Mazi Nnamdi Kanu's case began to shift from courts and constitutions to public trust, regional leadership, and political responsibility. One of the most visible consequences has been the renewed scrutiny of political leaders in Nigeria's southeast. For months, many ordinary citizens had asked a simple but painful question: who is truly working for a resolution? In this new phase, Governor Otti emerged as a central figure. Not because he made speeches, but because he acted. He went to the prison. He stayed in Abuja. He met the president. And in doing so, he changed the public perception of what political commitment looks like. That contrast exposed a deeper tension. Other leaders from the region, particularly sitting governors who had previously issued statements supporting Kanu's release, now found themselves under pressure. Past declarations, some dating back to 2023 and 2024, were brought up again, not as praise but as challenges. Many citizens asked, what about now? What concrete steps are being taken today, not last year? This is where civil frustration became political accountability. Statements without action no longer carried the same weight. The moment demanded presence, negotiation, and risk. And in the absence of visible movement, silence itself began to look like complicity or fear. At the same time, another sensitive consequence emerged: the danger of misaligned voices. As discussions of settlement intensified, certain individuals began issuing public statements, claiming to speak on behalf of Kanu or the broader movement. One name that repeatedly surfaced was Imam or Ima Powerful, a figure without a clear identity, official mandate, or legal standing. While some of these statements raised legitimate legal criticisms, the video strongly warns that unauthorized voices can do real damage. In politically sensitive cases, messaging matters. One poorly timed statement, one aggressive tone, one ambiguous claim. Any of these can undermine trust between negotiating parties. The concern raised is not about freedom of speech, but about strategic discipline. When a case reaches this stage, uncontrolled commentary can reverse progress quietly made. The civil implications extend even further. Communities already polarized by years of tension risk being misled by false hope or provoked into anger by misinformation. This is why the spread of AI-generated images and mocking narratives is not merely offensive, it is destabilizing. Such content does not just insult an individual. It reopens wounds, reignites suspicion, and hardens positions at the very moment compromise requires calm. Politically, the Tinubu administration also faces consequences. By choosing a restrained path, neither announcing a pardon nor allowing the legal process to accelerate unchecked, the presidency has placed itself in a narrow corridor. Move too slowly and public patience erodes. Move too boldly and accusations of judicial interference return. The balance is delicate, and failure on either side could deepen mistrust in institutions already under strain. This is why the current phase is not about victory or defeat. It is about management of expectations, of voices, of timing. The civil cost of failure would be significant: renewed unrest, deeper regional alienation, and a loss of faith in political dialogue. The political cost could be just as severe: damaged credibility, fractured alliances, and a missed opportunity to resolve a case that has lingered for far too long. At this stage, restraint is not weakness, silence is not inaction, and caution for once may be the most powerful signal of intent. While the developments surrounding Mazi Nnamdi Kanu may appear at first glance to be an internal Nigerian matter, they are being watched far beyond the country's borders. In diplomatic circles, cases like this are never viewed in isolation. They are interpreted as signals, indicators of how a government manages dissent, negotiates internal conflict, and balances power between institutions. From the perspective of the United States, Nigeria is not just another African nation. It is Africa's most populous country, one of Washington's key strategic partners in West Africa, and a central player in regional security energy markets and counterterrorism cooperation. That means decisions made in Abuja often carry implications well beyond Nigeria's borders. For American policymakers, the Kanu case sits at the intersection of several long-standing concerns: human rights, political stability, and constitutional order. The U.S. government has historically emphasized due process and judicial independence in its foreign policy messaging, particularly when dealing with allies. At the same time, Washington is deeply aware that unresolved internal conflicts can fuel long-term instability, something it has seen repeatedly across the Sahel and parts of Central Africa. This is why the idea of a political settlement, if handled carefully, may not be viewed negatively in Western capitals. In fact, from a global perspective, political solutions to deeply political problems are often seen as preferable to endless legal battles that inflame tensions without resolving root causes. In Northern Ireland, Colombia, and South Africa, history has shown that courtroom victories alone rarely end political conflicts. Negotiation, restraint, and compromise often do. What matters to international observers is not whether a settlement is explored, but how. If Nigeria's executive branch were seen as openly overriding courts, it would raise alarms in Washington, London, and Brussels. Such actions would likely be framed as democratic backsliding. But that is precisely why the reported approach, slowing procedural momentum without issuing direct orders, is significant. It signals awareness of constitutional boundaries, even while seeking an alternative path. Global media outlets have also taken note of the misinformation surrounding the case. The spread of AI-generated images and inflammatory narratives reinforces a broader international concern about digital manipulation and political destabilization. For Western audiences, this is a familiar problem. It mirrors challenges seen in U.S. elections, European politics, and global conflict zones where disinformation becomes a weapon. In this sense, Nigeria's experience is not unique. It is part of a wider global struggle to govern in an era where perception can be manufactured faster than truth. For older American viewers in particular, this moment may feel uncomfortably familiar. It echoes past periods when governments faced internal division and had to choose between escalation and reconciliation. The lesson history offers is sobering. Unresolved grievances rarely disappear on their own. They either evolve into dialogue or harden into something far more dangerous. From a global standpoint, then the question is not whether Nigeria should pursue stability, it is whether it can do so without sacrificing legitimacy. And that is why the world is watching quietly, carefully, to see whether this fragile opening leads to resolution or closes under the weight of mistrust and noise. As we bring this discussion to a close, it is important to pause and recognize where things truly stand, not where speculation pushes them and not where emotion wants them to be. No one has announced a release. No court order has been overturned. No appeal has been canceled. What exists right now is something far more fragile: an opening. An opening created not through force, but through restraint. Not through loud declarations, but through quiet coordination. The reported decision to slow procedural momentum in order to explore a political settlement does not guarantee success. But it does signal a shift away from endless confrontation and toward a possibility that did not exist before. That said, this moment comes with serious warnings. Political settlements are easily broken. They collapse under pressure, misinformation, and careless words. Every false image shared online, every unauthorized statement issued in anger, every attempt to mock or provoke, all of these have consequences. They do not simply affect public opinion, they shape decisions made behind closed doors. History is clear on this point. Many negotiations fail not because the solution was impossible, but because the environment became too hostile for compromise to survive. This is why discipline matters now more than ever. For supporters of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, patience may feel like surrender, but it is not. For critics, silence may feel suspicious, but it is not proof of wrongdoing. At this stage, noise helps no one. Calm observation does. There is also a broader lesson here, one that extends beyond Nigeria. Across the continent, from West Africa to the Sahel, governments are grappling with unresolved political questions that courts alone cannot fix. Whether one looks at constitutional debates, regional security crises, or the wider landscape of Africa news today, the pattern is familiar. When political problems are treated only as legal issues, they tend to return in more dangerous forms. The challenge is not choosing between law and politics, it is learning how to respect both. For Nigeria, how this moment is handled will shape more than one case. It will influence trust in institutions, confidence in leadership, and the belief that dialogue is still possible in deeply divided times. And for observers watching from abroad, especially older Americans who have lived through periods of national division, the lesson resonates clearly. Societies heal not through humiliation, but through carefully managed resolution. As this story continues to unfold, we encourage you to stay grounded. Question what you see, verify what you hear, and resist the urge to rush to conclusions before the facts are complete. If you believe clarity matters more than headlines, please share this video. If you want continued careful analysis of developments like this across Africa, subscribe to the channel. And most importantly, let us know your thoughts below. Do you believe a political settlement is the right path forward, or should this case be left entirely to the courts? Your perspective matters.